So the Supreme Court just gave Trump the green light to reshape mail-in voting in his image, but there's also more to the story. Jesse Waters and Abdul El-Sayed devolved into a shouting match on Fox News about Ding-a-Lings, while there's also this Hassan Piker controversy. A real-life Spider-Man who started beating up on far-right provocateurs was just unmasked. Target just got caught trying to sell a Jim Crow-style kids costume. And I can't wait to see a bunch of y'all in Boston and Philadelphia this Friday and Saturday. We're talking about all of that and even more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, starting with this. If you just take a look at social media right now, you will see literally dozens of Democratic governors and Congress members flipping their shit about the same thing, calling it illegal, unconstitutional, undemocratic, an attempt to rig the election for Republicans. Because in a 6-3 decision along partisan lines, the Supreme Court just gave Donald Trump the green light to clamp down on mail-in voting, at least for now. And that's because the ruling that we just got is not the final word, and we'll get into exactly why and who's fighting back. But first, we've got to do a quick refresher on the executive order that created this entire mess. Because you had Trump signing it back in March, and it did three big things. First, it told the Department of Homeland Security to start compiling lists of U.S. citizens in each state. Second, it directed federal officials to send those lists to state officials, presumably so that they could purge their voter rolls. And third, it prohibited the U.S. Postal Service from delivering mail ballots from anyone not on those lists. And Trump's so-called justification for all this is that he needs to stop Democrats from rigging elections with massive voter fraud.
Mail-in voting means mail-in cheating. I call it mail-in cheating.
But key thing, pretty much every credible expert and reasonable person was like, yeah, that's definitely not a thing. You are delusional, and we're not going to let you get away with it. And so more than 20 Democratic state attorneys general sued to block the executive order, and in late June, a federal judge granted their request, saying that the Postal Service does not have the authority to decide who votes and who doesn't. In fact, neither does the president. With her writing, the Constitution does not grant the president any specific powers over elections, and she even underlined the words does not, just for extra emphasis. With then an appeals court agreeing, and at that point, Trump's team got desperate. And so seemingly they went to the Supreme Court, they got on their knees with tears in their eyes, and they said, pretty please, will you give us an emergency ruling? And while that's how we got to this latest decision, it is also very, very important to clarify exactly what it does, because a lot of people do seem confused about this. The Supreme Court did not rule that Trump's executive order was lawful. Right? That question is gonna have to be taken up later, probably pretty soon since the midterms are right around the corner. What the court actually said is that the lawsuit challenging the order wasn't valid, so Trump could go ahead with enforcing it. But then also, here's where things get a little weird, because the same federal judge who originally blocked the order didn't just block it once, she did it twice. Right, first, in the case brought by the blue states that just got overturned, and a second time in a different case that the Supreme Court has not touched. So in effect, Trump is still blocked from doing what he wants, but not as much as he was before. Right, so now, while his USPS cannot refuse to deliver ballots, his DHS can start compiling those voter lists, and his DOJ can prosecute people who give ballots to anyone ineligible to vote, which definitely does matter, because you have critics arguing that when you put those two things together, it looks an awful lot like he's saying, hey, if you send ballots to anyone not on my list, I'll send the DOJ after you. But now you also have Trump wanting to get rid of that last remaining block on his order. And you have his team threatening to take it to an appeals court if the judge doesn't walk it back by 5:30 p.m. Eastern time today. Though I'm also not sure how much of a difference that would actually make, given that a dozen red states have already appealed it. And so now, with the Supreme Court's latest decision loosening the cuffs on Trump, you have many Democratic states vowing to put up a fight in the courtroom. And actually, speaking for the court's three liberal justices, you have Ketanji Brown Jackson warning that the ruling needlessly injects chaos and uncertainty into the upcoming midterm elections. In adding, it also lets another shoe drop in the Kafkaesque nightmare that our precedents have been steadily creating for certain plaintiffs who seek to bring election-related challenges. But the conservative majority was like, look, the plaintiffs just brought this lawsuit too early, arguing the harms that they're suing over, they just haven't happened yet, saying they're conjectural or hypothetical. To which you then have critics saying, okay, two things. First of all, of course the harms haven't happened yet. We are suing to prevent that, but also some of them have started to become real. Where you had the federal judge pointing out that Connecticut had already begun shifting election workers away from other duties to prepare for the order to go into effect, and several more states had already purchased ballot envelopes that wouldn't be in compliance with the order. But then also, while the court's majority didn't believe the states had suffered real harm, it did agree that the Trump administration was, quote, likely to suffer irreparable harm. To which critics were like, yeah, we know what harm that is. Trump himself told us.
It'll guarantee the midterms. It'll guarantee the midterms. If you don't get it, big trouble.
And in the meantime, as it's waiting for a final decision from the Supreme Court, Trump's Postal Service just released its final draft of the new rules that it would enforce to comply with his executive order. And so first off, it would refuse to deliver mail ballots in states that don't share voter data with the federal government. Second, it would refuse to deliver ballots from people not on its approved list. And finally, it would require states to put unique trackable barcodes on every ballot envelope so that it could verify that it's approved. And while with this, they argue that there's already a precedent for the USPS putting barcodes on certain types of mail, such as baked bombs and cremated remains. You had the Democratic election lawyer Mark Elias just mocking the hell out of that reasoning.
They say, quote, although ballot mail does not present precisely the same operational issues as cremated remains or replica explosives, it is unquestionably sensitive mail that raises unique operational considerations. To say that pieces of paper in an envelope do not present precisely the same operation issues as cremated remains or fake explosives? Seems to be a bit of an understatement. It doesn't present anything similar. Have these people lost their fucking minds?
And so, yeah, we're gonna have to see if any of this fully comes to fruition, but understand the clock is ticking. Election day is just or is still a couple of months away, depending on how you're viewing time, but some states, they're about to start sending out mail ballots as early as next week. And then actually, as we have our eyes on that and we wait to see how that plays out, we should also talk about how in another sitcom moment from real political news, we've got to talk about Abdul El-Sayed and Jesse Waters yelling about Ding-a-Lings on primetime TV. Because you're the Michigan Senate candidate doing an interview with Fox's resident smartass, and they initially agreed to have a wholesome conversation about real issues. Though, of course, this is Fox News, and so the interview just devolved into complete chaos because that's more Waters' style. And while you had them clashing on issues like immigration, the Iran war, and taxing the rich, by far the most buzzworthy moment was when they got on the topic of gender-affirming surgery for minors.
So, Abdul, you're a doctor, right? Selectively.
I am.
So you think it's okay for a parent to slash his kid's Ding-a-Ling off? You think that's okay?
I mean, do you really want to have this conversation? Are you circumcised?
Yeah, but I mean, that's a
Jesse,
personal question.
Okay.
Doctor.
So you probably should want to move on. You probably should want to move on.
Is circumcision's different than castration?
I think it's a problem. It's a problem that you think that you get to decide what happens between a parent, a doctor, and a patient. And I'm just saying that, yes, circumcision is surgery on a kid's ding-a-ling. So if you really want to bring that up, you can. I just think you guys are really selective about how you want to talk about these things.
Abdul, Michigan's not going for that. That is sick stuff.
Like, Jesse, you have not asked me one time about the issues that people actually care about in Michigan. You don't want to talk about gas prices. You don't want to talk about groceries. You don't want to talk about health care. You don't want to talk about this stupid trade war that's about to destroy Michigan's economy.
We spent the whole interview talking about that stuff.
That's destroying that is destroying our own military. You don't seem to want to talk about any of those things. You want to bring up all this culture war that, you know, I'm not here to fight a culture war. I'm here to
we talked about gas.
Right, and all of that, it's kind of like what we've talked about before. You've got a lot of these right-wing politicians and right-wing pundits like Waters loving to fixate on this particular culture war issue, right? It's something that either is not happening or is very rarely happening, all instead of talking about the more boring, everyday issues that affect everyone. And so with El-Sayed, you see that he's not advocating for gender-affirming care for minors. He's just arguing that it is a personal issue for families and their medical providers to figure out. And you've got him pointing out that Waters is using that topic to avoid talking about a variety of very pressing issues, with Waters then looking uncomfortable, scrambling, raising his voice, and resorting to his favorite adjectives, wacky and sick. But that is also not to say that stoking the culture war fires is not effective on especially right-wingers, but also independents. And while El-Sayed, yes, was able to beat Haley Stevens in the primary, even though she was outspending him like crazy, you now have El-Sayed campaigning for the general election, which is going to be a very real test, right? And this is Michigan, which not only is a swing state, but one of the most important swing states. And it's a state that Trump won in 2016, lost in 2020, but then won again in 2024. So you've got El-Sayed having to figure out how to earn the votes of the whole Democratic base there, not just the progressive one. And so with that, you're already seeing him adjusting his campaign strategy to hopefully make that happen, with him sharing his message on unfriendly platforms like Fox so he can reach swing voters. And also very recently, you saw him distancing himself from some of the most famous progressives in the party. For example, in a new CNN segment, Dana Bash showed how El-Sayed recently edited his ads to exclude Bernie Sanders.
We noticed something really telling about Michigan Democrat Abdul El-Sayed's new ads. He's recycling some from the Democratic primary, but with a really big change. Check this one out. This is featuring his grandparents from the Democratic primary.
He knows what things cost.
Now he's running around with Bernie Sanders trying to change politics.
We love him, and so will you.
Now, of course, he's running in the general election against Republican Mike Rogers. The same ad was released. No mention of Bernie Sanders.
He knows what things cost. He learned his Michigan values in our small town.
Take it from us.
We love him, and so will you.
He's also been distancing himself from Hassan Piker, right, who in addition to being one of Fox News' favorite boogeymen, has also been in the center of a lot of debates regarding the Democratic Party. With El-Sayed specifically, you saw him distancing himself after Piker said that American Jewish support for Israel could lead someone to take action against Jews in the US. Right, and for a little context there, Piker was talking about Michigan State Senator Jeremy Moss refusing to back El-Sayed, and he was actually expressing concern about rising anti-Semitism. Right, in the full clip, he was emphasizing the danger of tying all American Jewish people to Israel right now. And so you've also seen him now defending himself against people people, he says, are trying to twist his words. And so you had El Sayed saying, my commitment to Jewish safety is the same as my commitment to the safety of my own daughter, saying anti-Semitism is a scourge and we need to address it in all its forms, and I stand against any rhetoric that puts the community at risk. But adding, I want to be crystal clear, nobody speaks for this campaign besides me and my campaign spokespeople. And while politicians and pundits try to make this race about a Twitch streamer, we're going to be talking about gas, groceries, good schools, and healthcare. And so again, trying to steer the focus away from divisive drama and towards fundamental issues that affect everyone. And generally, his whole strategy looks something like saying yes to tough interviews, always bring the conversation back to issues of affordability and healthcare, denouncing anti-Semitism without compromising his own views or criticisms of the Israeli government, and having a viral social media moment here and there. But he's essentially taken a page or two out of the Zoran Mamdani playbook. And in fact, scourge, that is the same word that Mamdani has repeatedly used to describe anti-Semitism. And the comparisons also don't end there because, while Piker supported Mamdani's campaign, Mamdani also had to distance himself from the streamer, calling his past remarks about 9/11 objectionable and reprehensible. And so one of the questions ends up being is, Abdul Sayed, is he like Mamdani in that he'll be very skilled at always bringing the focus of the conversation back to affordability, right? His messaging about freezing the rent, offering fast and free buses, providing accessible childcare, it's resonated with a lot of voters in New York City, and it's easy to remember. And El Sayed's own similar campaign slogan is getting money out of politics, putting money in your pocket, and passing Medicare for all. But of course, Michigan has a very different electorate than New York City, so we're gonna have to wait to see, does he court the Dems? Does he get the swing voters? Can he beat Mike Rogers in November? And it's incredibly important, right? If he does not win that seat, it's gonna be so much harder for the Dems to take control of the Senate. And then we've got some huge news we've got to dive into, but first, two quick things. One, if you were even remotely near Boston or Philadelphia this Friday and Saturday, I want to see a beautiful face. Because I'm doing a live tour across the country right now. Last weekend, I was in Seattle and Portland. Amazing people, amazing shows. And this weekend, we'll be performing and doing a live show at the Wilbur and the Fillmore, within these other 8 cities soon after. And you should grab your tickets at crashingouttour.com. I got a link in the top of the description, as well as a top comment. And then also, too, I'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. I want to give a shout out to all you beautiful bastards that entered our weekly $500 SeatGeek giveaways, right? Because today's sponsor, SeatGeek, has doled out nearly $60,000 to you guys to get you off the couch and into the comedy club, the stadium, or the concert hall since 2024, and it's been awesome. And so I gotta say, if you haven't done this yet, do it, right? Summer is in full swing and the events are stacking up. You've got baseball, football, tours for Bruno Mars, Noah Khan, your favorite comedians. Get out there. And with this, it's free to enter and it takes 2 seconds. Oh wow, SeatGeek's the #1 rated ticketing app with over 28 million downloads and tickets to over 70,000 events, sports, music, comedy, theater, you name it. Like, go now, look for tickets to literally anything, and you just download the app or hit that link in the description and use code PHIL10 for 10% off your purchase on SeatGeek, new customers and all. And next, and this part is key, add that code to your SeatGeek account. That gets you the 10% off, and it enters you in for your chance to win the weekly $500 giveaway, no purchase required. And if you're a SeatGeek vet, we're not leaving you out. Add code PHIL10 to your account and you're entered. So yeah, scan that QR code or click the link below, add code PHIL10, and go make some memories. And then, diving right back into the news, we've got to talk about how the NFL just received incredibly troubling and worrying information about the prevalence of CTE. Right, because you now have a new study estimating that at least 1 in 4 NFL players will end up with the disease. Or with the New York Times saying this represents an occupational safety hazard with little comparison in the American workplace. And as far as the specifics of this study, it was just published today in the medical journal BMJ, and it started by looking at over 1,700 former NFL players who died between 2008 and 2021. And because CTE can only be diagnosed by analyzing the brain after death, that meant that researchers depend on donated brains to study the disease. And so they specifically narrowed in on the deaths between 2016 and 2021, which had the highest rates of brain donors, 235 out of 878. And so then, among all deaths in those 5 years, 215 had confirmed cases of CTE, which is 24.5%. But again, 643 brains were not examined, and some of those may have had CTE too, which is then why the study's lead author is saying that 25% is on the low end, where the maximum possible prevalence was at 97%, but the author says that the true rate is somewhere in the middle, which at the very least sounds right, because CTE is a form of brain damage caused by repeated head injuries, even injuries that may not have been severe enough to initially cause concussions. And the symptoms include memory loss, problems with concentration, mood disturbances like aggression and depression, suicidal thoughts, and more. And while it often impacts any athletes who play any sport with tackling and head trauma, as well as combat vets, it's really become synonymous with football players. And so one of the reasons this is such a major study is that because in most cases of CTE, they're not publicly disclosed, right? Most NFL players, they don't end up getting their brains examined. So we actually know very little about how many cases there truly are within the sport. And it's really eye-opening when you talk to the actual players. Or you had the Times, for example, speaking to former Tampa Bay Buccaneers player Randy Grimes, who played with several athletes who were later diagnosed with CTE, and he currently runs a nonprofit counseling retired players. And regarding this study, he said, I bet the real number is a lot bigger. But even knowing this, he said the idea of CTE kind of remains an unspoken horror among football players, right? They don't really discuss it, saying it's not something that's brought up. It's not something that players want to talk about, and saying we could probably move forward faster in our research if we did talk more about it. But players don't want to do it. They don't want want to think they have it. They don't want to think they're seeing it. And adding deep down, we all know that probably the majority of us are going to have some form of CTE. And as sobering and as upsetting as that is, it's also not that surprising considering the NFL has repeatedly been accused of ignoring and downplaying the risk of CTE. And actually, for their part, they responded to this study by saying the NFL continuously strives to make the game of football safer, including by implementing strategies to reduce concussions and head impacts, saying the NFL remains committed to ensuring that the NFL community has access to a robust and expanding set of resources to enhance their physical and mental well-being. And so actually with that, there's been a debate on whether or not today's study actually reflects today's NFL. Because if this focused on players who died between 2016 and 2021, that means their careers likely took place in the decades prior, with many likely playing before 2005 when the first case of CTE was diagnosed in an NFL player and prompted initial waves. But you have others in the field saying, hey, whatever the NFL's done, we have no proof that rates of CTE are actually decreasing. Right, just last month, for example, we learned that former Cowboys player Marshawn Kneeland, who died at just 24 from suicide, had CTE. And in a release of his diagnosis, the CEO of the Concussion and CTE Foundation noted, Mr. Kneeland played in the modern era of concussion protocols and better helmets, and yet he still developed CTE, saying we have no reason to believe the current generation is at a lower risk of CTE than previous generations. Concussion protocols do not prevent CTE because CTE is caused by repeated head impacts, not just concussions. And regarding this study, he also added,
and I'm sure there are going to be people who believe that this is a historical study of how we used to play, but here's my thoughts on that. There are some rule changes to prevent intentional head-to-head hits, and helmets might be a little bit better. But offsetting that, players are bigger, stronger, and faster than they've ever been before. They're starting younger than they did 50 years ago, and seasons are longer. So we don't know how to extrapolate this study of that population to the modern game, but future studies will explore that.
But one thing that researchers do seem to agree on is that CTE is preventable, right? With the study's lead author explaining to the Times, we know what's causing it. It's a neurodegenerative disease where we know and have complete control over the risk. And because the biggest predictor of CTE is the cumulative force of hits over a whole lifetime, including ones that happen before a player ever makes it to the NFL, he says, we can change that cumulative force without changing the game of football. Right? Saying that you can reduce risk by having children refraining from playing tackle football or having all teams at all levels eliminate hits during practices, or with the thinking being that removing any instances where someone might take a hit, it can lower risk. And then you're also seeing that there are efforts to try to diagnose all this among living people. And you've got some former NFL players participating in studies that could bring answers on that front. But also one of the things there is those answers are not going to come overnight. And while we're going to have to wait to see what happens from there, another place where we saw essentially a massive change and scandal and outrage stemming from something that happened overnight is with Stars and Stripes. Or because Stars and Stripes, it's a military newspaper that's largely funded by the Department of Defense, but it's always enjoyed editorial independence. Until now. Or because you just saw 3 major figures within the Stars and Stripes staff getting the axe after daring to suggest that the Trump DOD could possibly be overreaching into their publication. And hitting on what a big deal this is, we have to go back a little. Right? If you don't know, Stars and Stripes was first published back in the Civil War and it was revived during World War I. It's a newspaper specifically for American military service members and their families, with articles about new tactics involving drones, service members and families facing food insecurity, and even recent coverage about the apparent suicide attempts from those aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. It reportedly averages over 1 million viewers per day, even releasing print editions overseas for service members in more remote locations. And like I told you, to this point, it had enjoyed walking that tightrope of having both governmental funding and editorial independence. But in recent months, you've had that balance being put to the test. Back in January, you had Chief Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell saying that Stars and Stripes needs to, quote, refocus its content away from woke distractions, which ended up kind of just being the beginning of a line of collapsing dominoes. And in March, you had a memo coming down from the DOD called Modernization of Stars and Stripes Operations, which did appear to reaffirm the paper's independence, but followed it up with a mandate that all content be consistent with good order and discipline, which is a very vague phrase typically used in military justice. And then you had the paper's ombudsman, Jacqueline Smith, getting fired. And it was her job to safeguard the paper's editorial independence. And upon learning about the total prohibition on anything from the AP appearing in their paper, she wrote a column that opened with, "Pete Hegseth doesn't want you to see cartoons in this newspaper anymore." And 2 weeks after that, she was out of a job, saying she knew that she was poking the bear, but she didn't expect that kind of retaliation. And then she added, by having a government agency say, you cannot print this, it's the beginning of saying more, you cannot print that, or you must print this. It's editorial control. And actually, one of the biggest outlets to bring attention to all these issues was CBS Sunday Morning. Right? They interviewed some of the paper's leadership last month, including the editor-in-chief, Eric Slavin, who was asked where the line was between his loyalty to the paper and his loyalty to the Pentagon.
Do you have red lines in your mind?
Yes, I do.
Give me a red line.
Well, don't run a perfectly accurate story. Run this instead. Here it is, written by the Pentagon. That would be a red line. We need to be able to provide independent news to service members. If we can't do that, if we were turned into something other than that, if we were public relations, that's That's the foxhole.
And that was also echoed by Laura Kortzi, a Middle East correspondent based in Germany.
I'm working for Stars and Stripes. Not for the Pentagon, not for any administration, not for any policymaker. I'm here to cover the military community.
But apparently those comments were too much, with both Kortzi and Slavin getting termination notices last week. And with the official reason reportedly being insubordination connected to the CBS Sunday News appearance. And it wasn't even just them. There's also Max Lederer Jr., the longtime publisher, who announced his retirement just days before all this happened. And you had him citing conflict with the top brass and saying it has, quote, become clear that my philosophy of leadership and my understanding of the value and mission of Stars and Stripes differ in fundamental ways from the direction the leadership of the Department of Defense has for the organization. So with these three firings, or effective firings, you saw them making headlines, especially as they started talking about it with different outlets. Or you had Slavin going on BBC to outline just how muddled things had gotten between the military and Stars and Stripes, and just the military communication with the public in general.
They say they are transparent, but at the same time, from what I've seen of many people in public affairs, essentially the military's public relations arm here, is that they're less and less inclined to speak on the record. And so that lack of information, particularly at such a critical time where you see combat in Iran, where there are tensions in the Asia Pacific, where the Ukraine war continues, this is a time where we really need to hear what's happening. And if journalists aren't able to have frank conversations with the Pentagon, that I don't think that's a great sign.
He also mentioned Stars and Stripes violating their own rules and bringing on an active duty Navy captain named William Urban as a deputy publisher without consulting anyone, saying for years the paper's been disconnected from the military chain of command and he's not sure what the future looks like from there, and then adding, I certainly hope Stars and Stripes can remain independent in some way. Adding, I haven't given up on that, but time will tell, and I think there needs to be a reckoning. You then also had Kortzi speaking with CNN about how her own pink slip caught her completely off guard.
As you said, I feel like my comments were exactly in line with historic precedent and also the Pentagon's own recent statement reaffirming our editorial independence. And so to me, that was simply stating a matter of fact and a matter of common knowledge.
With her also going on Twitter to say that her termination and the reason they gave is, quote, shame for the institution and service members who swore to defend the Constitution and deserve the right to a free and independent press. And then as far as the paper's response to all of this, you had the chair of the Stars and Stripes Publishers Advisory Board saying that they are, quote, deeply concerned that these actions further threaten to interrupt the editorial independence that is essential to Stars and Stripes' credibility and its ability to serve the military community with trusted independent journalism. Though with all this, you then have William Urban, that Navy captain that the Pentagon placed as a deputy publisher, telling a very different story. Where you had him saying that the top brass, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's office, are, quote, committed to the editorial independence of Stripes, and adding, it is time to take them at their word and get on with the business of reporting. But as far as what that reporting is going to look like, right, whether it goes full DoD propaganda or does maintain independence completely or some independence, that remains to be seen. But personally, I would add, given what we've seen from this administration, but also specifically from Pete Hegseth, I'm not confident. Whether it be Hegseth, Trump, a number of these top officials who have been planted in there, they seem to not like any voices that are not repeating what they are saying. And they've used every lever to bury anyone that is not seen as a complete ally. And then actually from that, I'm going to cram in some more news you need to know. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. I'll feel completely on top of my money until I actually check and realize 3 different things renewed that week. But thankfully, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, it makes it so much easier for me to stay on top of everything. It helps me keep track of all the financial stuff that's easy to lose sight of. I think due dates, credit card balances, free trials, subscriptions, that random annual charge that you forgot was coming. And Rocket Money helps take a lot of that mental overhead off of your plate without making budgeting feel like a second job. It puts your spending, balances, subscriptions, and upcoming bills all in one place so you can quickly see what's actually happening with your money. Though I will say my favorite feature, it might be the subscription tracker, right? It's amazing how many memberships and subscriptions quietly stick around way after you stopped using them. And Rocket Money lays out everything clearly and can even help you cancel the subscriptions that you no longer want. Also, the alerts are helpful, right? You can get a heads up about big purchases, upcoming bills, and low balances before they become a problem. And for me, the biggest benefit is having a clearer picture instead of wondering whether I forgot something. So hey, take more control of your finances and try Rocket Money for free. Just go to rocketmoney.com/Phil or scan that QR code to get started today and unlock even more features when you sign up for premium. But then diving back into the news for your final block today, let's cram in some more news you need to know quickly. Starting with the fact that your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, he didn't keep it so friendly when Jake Lang showed up in Minneapolis last Saturday. Because that is when Lang, who's a J6er, was set to lead a rally outside of their city hall. And he came as he normally does, with outrageously racist protest signs, pissing off the crowd of counter-protesters as much as he could. And while that crowd wasn't allowed to have their cars on the street where it was all happening, when Lang came, his crew drove him not just on the street, but on the sidewalk in front of City Hall with MPD surrounding them. With police officials saying that was only because everything happened so fast that they didn't have time to redirect them. But whatever the case, in that moment, all of it made for a recipe for disaster. You would counter protesters throwing all kinds of stuff at Lang and his crew, water balloons, glitter, even spraying what looks like silly string at one point. And it wasn't long after things heated up that you saw someone dressed as Spider-Man hopping on Lang's trunk and immediately going to work, throwing blow after blow, with someone then bringing out the pepper spray to break it up. And from there, after giving police a slip a few times, the guy was eventually in cuffs. Right? And since then, those videos have gone viral with people naming the whole thing Spider-Man, a brand new fade. And the man behind the mask has also become the internet's favorite masked vigilante, though we now know exactly who he is, William Nicholas Love. And that's because he was one of the 11 people arrested in the chaos of it all, and he's facing assault charges. That's also as Lang himself got locked up, with officials accusing him of starting a riot, though now officials are saying that charge didn't stick. Though as far as Love, he's out and there's some GoFundMe set up to support him. Though I also want to note that for a number of people, this was bigger than, just Jake Lang. Or even some people claiming Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and the police department defended white supremacy that day, and adding, it's not just standing up against Jake Lang, we're standing up against him, Mayor Frey, and the Minneapolis Police Department. Then also in the news, you just had Target pull a costume that it was selling on its website, and I promise you, there is no world where you are prepared for what you are about to see. Or you've got this kids glows under blacklight circus clown Halloween costume, or if you have eyes, it is a literal blackface inspired Halloween costume. It's complete with the kid in the picture posed like a Jim Crow painting. And Target didn't even try to save face here. As soon as this listing went viral, they took it down and issued an apology, saying as a company, we know we got this wrong and we are deeply sorry. The costume is offensive and should never have been a part of our assortment, saying we know this is especially hurtful for our Black guests, team members, and partners, and adding removing the costume is an important first step, and the company is looking closely at how this happened and what needs to change to ensure this won't happen again. But in no way did that take the heat off of them. Because one, you have people asking, how the hell did this costume even get approved on the site? Especially because the line this was seemingly sold under, Hide and Eek, is reportedly a Target-owned line. It's not some third-party seller. And two, Target's already on the outs with a lot of its old base for rolling back its DEI initiatives last year, with many still boycotting, and I doubt this convinces them to go back. Some even saying that those DEI initiatives might have actually helped them here. You also have the news, and we should talk about the latest in the US trade war with Canada, right? Because last weekend, Trump dropped 50% tariffs on $20 billion worth of Canadian goods. And with that, Canadian officials have already cranked up tariffs on some products. Now, they're really fighting fire with fire, right? Because they just announced that they're going to match his tariffs dollar for dollar, and it all starts on September 8th. So similar to Trump's tariffs, this will hit around $20 billion worth of American imports, around 700 different products. And they'll be collecting the tariffs on a sliding scale of 50, 25, and 15% depending on the product. And American steel, aluminum, furniture, clothes, those are going to be in the 50% bracket. All while opinion polls show that most Canadians are in support of this type of response. Though I'll also say you have economists warning that there is a chance that they may not work out as expected. Some saying that Canada's economy is about 1/12 the size of the US economy, so its retaliatory tariffs will have the effect of a pea shooter in a gun battle. And you've got some experts worried that this move may actually hurt Canadian businesses in the long run. But there, you have Canadian officials also announcing a $7.5 billion relief package to help businesses affected by all this. And that includes an additional $1.5 billion available through the Regional Tariff Response Initiative, where they're helping businesses manage liquidity pressures and get more access to financing, among other things. And so it seems like they're trying to keep Canadian companies in mind while also understanding, even if they are 1/12 the size of America, you have to fight back. And while we're gonna have to wait to see how this plays out, this does represent a new low for US trade relations with Canada. And now one of the main questions is if they'll keep going tit for tat. I mean, for example, Canada's automobile industry, it's already been hanging in the balance here. And just yesterday, Trump threatened to double his tariffs there to 50%, which would be detrimental to their car plants. And he's now apparently considering renaming Lake Ontario to Lake America, which Ontario Premier Doug Ford has said could bring more retaliatory measures. But for now, we'll wait to see how things play out, whether it be the sliding scale of pissing off our partners and also what it does to our economies. But that, my friend, you beautiful bastard, is the end of your Tuesday show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of this community, whether it's 2 days or 2 decades. And also, thank you in advance to everyone coming out to crashingouttour.com. This last weekend honestly made me wish that all the shows were live shows. But hey, no matter what you do, I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.